Good evening, folks. Triple Crown here, coming to you from Vancouver, British Columbia. This evening, we're going to be going over the Global War 1939 continuation playtest, Russia and Communist China, or CCP, overview. So there's a few things that are from the original that we've kept in. Some of them we've tweaked a little bit, and some of them are the same. So Russia starts the game as a neutral, and they collect 15 IPP to start the game on the first round. And they are not at war with the European Axis until they reach a full wartime production of 48 IPP, or some other conditions are met. Those being the Italians or the Germans attack Russia, the Germans or the Italians attack Eastern Poland, Baltic states, Turkey, and I believe that is it on the sort of Eastern Front. Now, Japan can declare war on Russia at any time, and Russia can declare war on Japan at any time. But going down here to the Middle East, Russia cannot declare war on these nations down here until they are at war. So they can't declare war on Turkey or any of the countries in the Middle East. So that is sort of the political situation. Now this can be played as a two-player game, so it's not like 1936 where the Comintern is sort of out for itself and the Allies are sort of out for themselves. So they're kind of working in concert together, but they have their own agenda because they were concerned about post-war. But that is not the case in this game. It can be a two-player game, but basically one side versus the other. You do not need three players to play the game. Now, when you talk about Russia, starting at 15 IPP, well, how do they get to 48? And the answer to that is they roll 2d12 at the end of their turn, and whatever that total is, that is their IPP value for the next turn, and it's cumulative. So for example, if on round 1, Russia rolls a 10, that means they have 10 IPP going into round 2. And if round 2, they roll another 10, that would mean they have a total of 20 going into round 3. Now this income only includes income from the dice rolls. It does not include territories that Russia takes. So if they take East Poland, that does not go towards their wartime income of 48. However, they do collect the money. I know that's maybe the confusing part. So for example, if Russia captured East Poland and they rolled 2 10s for their income on round 1 and round 2, their income, they still have to get up to 48 and they're only at 20, but going into round 3, they would have 22 IPP to spend. I hope that kind of clears that up. Now, I always found it interesting learning about, I'm just going to talk about this quickly, is that the Allies, meaning the UK and Canada, declared war on Germany when they invaded Poland, Western Poland. While that was happening, the Russians invaded East Poland. But the British and the Canadians did not declare war on Russia, which I find very interesting that happened. That basically, I think it came down to, I read it once, a pact or an agreement that basically gave a loophole for the British not to be forced into declaring war against Russia, because they knew that they needed the Russians to topple the Germans in the European Axis. So that's I just found it fascinating that it was about the bigger picture, not about, you declared war on our friend over here, Poland, and we're going to declare war on you. So I always found that fascinating. But in this game, Russia can declare war on Eastern Poland and in Baltic states. Now, Kurt likes to do this when he plays because he wants that money. I tend to leave those because that is a buffer between, and there's 7 or 6 units there. There's 4 in Eastern Poland and 2 in Baltic states. That's a buffer between Russia and Germany. So I like to leave that, but historically it's not accurate. So we're playing around with the idea that if Russia captures both of those territories, they are going to get an extra 5 IPP until they're taken away. And that's going to encourage Russia to go into those territories, which they have to be careful of, because if Germany is making an advance up in this direction, then Russia can easily get out of position if there's a can opener happening from Italy and Germany has all of their fast movers. So that is a risk. Now, to talk about the proxy war happening in Finland. So as soon as there's German units present in Finland, Russia can attack. Now, I used to always leave this. I used to say, I'm not going in there, I'm not getting out of position. And then I've played the Hilltop Pillbox or Kurt, and that's something that he really likes to do. And he's done it to me enough times where basically Russia is trying to kill as many of the Finnish and German units as possible without Germany and Russia declaring war on each other. Now, this can only happen on Finnish soil, meaning that the Finns cannot go into Russia. They cannot attack Russia until Germany is at war with Russia. But so basically it has to be contained in the 3 territories of Finland. And there's another reason why this is important for Russia to do, because now there's a scorched earth, and there's a major factory here. Now, scorched earth, you can only destroy or reduce your facilities when you're at war. So Russia's not at war right now. So they do not want the Finns or the Germans to capture this territory. It will be reduced to a minor, but now Germany can produce 3 units here per turn. Now if that happens, folks, that is detrimental for the Russians. So they want to push the Finns back enough that they cannot capture this factory until Russia is at war, because then they can reduce it to a minor, and if the Germans or the Italians or the Finns capture it, it is destroyed automatically if it's a minor. So that's why that little proxy war happening is very, very important to Russia. Now, this Russian Navy here, it can leave and do whatever the heck it wants. It's not bound to anything. Now, however, I'm talking about restriction of movement, and people ask this question all the time about Denmark. If Denmark is under Danish control, the Russians can go and come however they want. If it's under German control, it's up to the German player to either say yes or no, and the German player is never going to allow that Russian destroyer to leave. So what's it going to do? Well, and I actually made a mistake, folks. When I said any sea zone that's adjacent to Finland can also be attacked by Russian units, or the Germans can attack that destroyer there without declaring war on each other. So the proxy war does extend into the 2 sea zones that are adjacent to Finland. So that's another little wrinkle that that can occur. I'm just so another one of the rules that we've kept in is Russia is the only country in the game that can have partisan infantry. So what does that mean? So let's just pretend the Germans take Kharkov and they want to move into Leningrad, and they leave no units behind. Well, that would mean that on the next Russian turn, they would be able to put a partisan infantry in Kharkov. Now, that territory still belongs to Germany, but if on the following turn that partisan is still there, it turns into a regular infantry and becomes Russian territory again. Now, that's not such a big deal. Actually, it can be. So remember, when the European Axis are making their way to Moscow, they always have to leave an infantry behind, or a ground unit behind, or any unit behind. Otherwise, a partisan infantry will pop up. Now, so you remember, you have to make all, basically when you start to surround Moscow, or the Germans do, they basically have to have all these other territories here populated as well with units. Otherwise, the partisans will start popping up. Now, one way to help that is to maybe have infantry on the front surrounding Moscow, but your fast mover is one territory back. So if your object is to capture Moscow, your fast movers can make it to Moscow and still serve the objective of occupying space, or you could use your aircraft. So, but it's a little trickier for Japan. I find Japan, they start to get a little thin when they go into China, and when they start doing the Moscow crush from the frontier, it gets expensive, all these territories, to start leaving units behind. And I've seen games where people forget and the partisans pop up, and it's kind of funny. It's like, oh crap, that happened, and you got to go back and either leave them. Now, what can the partisans do? They cannot attack. They can only occupy the territory, and they defended it too. So they're pretty weak. But I've had it where a lone Tiger tank attacked a partisan. They're rolling at like a 9 or something, and the Tiger tank missed, and the partisan got a hit. So they're annoying, but they do serve a purpose. Now, like most variants, there is a Mongolia rule. I've tried to simplify it. So if Japan declares war on Russia, Mongolia is instantly, and that's any territory. So just saying I declare war on Russia is activating the Mongolians. So any declaration on war from Japan against Russia activates these Mongolians here, and they are still Mongolians, but any territory they capture becomes, that income goes towards Russia. So you don't have to swap them out. Those 6 units there, the 2 cavalry and 4 infantry, and then they're now helping the Russians. Okay, so, but if Russia declares war on the Japanese, the Mongolians remain a strict neutral for the rest of the game. So I try to simplify it. So it doesn't matter where Japan wants to land. They don't have to, it's nothing to do with being adjacent. If they attack any of these territories here, or any territory, even if they just say the words, and we declare war on Russia, that is the result. Now, let's talk about the CCP, or the Communist Chinese. So this is a little bit different in 1936, but basically there was a civil war happening in China in conjunction while the Japanese invaded. Like, I can't even imagine these, the Chinese fighting each other, but then also fighting the Japanese, who, technology with their Air Force really sort of outnumbered the Chinese. So that was a brutal situation for the Chinese. But the Chinese in this game cannot attack each other. They can only, so the Communist Chinese will move the same time the Russians move, and the Communist Chinese are already at war with Japan. So they don't, negate the Mongolia rule. So they can go and capture Japanese territory, and any territory they capture, that IPP value goes towards Russia. That does not go towards the Russian economy, the wartime economy, but it just goes towards Russia. And if the CCP controls all of their original territories, which was only 2, they get 1 free infantry per turn. But if they control more, say they control Chahar, that infantry can be placed in Chahar, or any of their other territories. Now, the CCP and the KMT cannot occupy the same territories. Now, let's say, you see how the Japanese have captured this territory here? The CCP can attack and capture it. And now that territory is part of the CCP, no longer part of the nationalist Chinese territory. And it will remain that way unless the Japanese recapture it and then the KMT take it back. So it is a likely scenario the Japanese go and wipe out the communist Chinese and the nationalist Chinese liberate it and they get the value for those territories. So, but they cannot occupy the same space. So as a non-combat movement, these KMT Chinese forces cannot go into the CCP and vice versa. So it's just kind of a little wrinkle. It's not exactly historically accurate because they're not fighting each other, but they're sort of two separate economies sort of supporting each other, which they kind of did, but they also, in truth, they were actually at war with each other. So now we're going to, anything else to talk about? Oh, Lend-Lease. So the United States can Lend-Lease Russia money. They're the only, I think, actually the United States can Lend-Lease only one nation money per turn, and just in my opinion that it's best served to go towards Russia. Now I tweaked it a tiny bit, but basically the U.S. declares Allied Lend-Lease. So here we go. Here's the back of the U.S. setup chart, and basically, I don't know if you can see it here, but those are the dice rolls. So they can spend up to 20 IPP per turn, pick one nation, so probably Russia. If they roll a 1, the Germans capture all the money. If they roll a 2, all the money is lost and returned to the bank. If they roll a 3 to 7, half of the money makes it to Russia. If they roll an 8 to a 12, all of the money makes it. So a little bit of a risk there for the Americans, and it kind of adds a little bit of an element. Like, I've seen it where the Germans for 2 turns in a row capture all the money, and turns where a couple in a row, it all goes to the bank, and so it's kind of a crapshoot. So it's not a guarantee that Russia's going to get that money, and it happens on the U.S. turn, so not on the Russia turn. So that's another little wrinkle which existed in the original, but I think I made the math a little bit more in the Allies' favor to make sure that money, the resources get to where they're going. And now another little wrinkle which was in the original, that if Moscow is captured by the Axis, that a second capital can pop up in Archangel up here, or Novosibirsk. Now the only difference now being is that all the money used to be returned to the bank. I think if you're going to go through the effort of capturing Moscow, you need to get paid. So if you capture Moscow, you get the IPP value, so whatever is in the Russian coffers, you get that money. The capital moves, so then following turn, whenever, say the capital moves to Archangel or Novosibirsk, the Russian player gets to choose. They would collect money on their next turn and be able to spend it. And there's a factory in Novosibirsk, so as long as the Japanese haven't captured it, that is probably the more logical choice. But, Archangel's another, territory as well. And in my opinion, in this game, if the Axis successfully capture Moscow and they're able to keep the Allies, within, basically they have not lost Paris yet, I can almost predict that is the swinging point or hinge point in the game. If Moscow is able to survive, that is huge. That's probably the biggest swing victory city in the game, other than Tokyo or Berlin, because that's an Allied victory. But if Moscow survives, so a lot of the game does depend on this battle here, this front here, and that's why I say the Allied Lend-Lease or the U.S. Lend-Lease to the Russians is so vitally important to keep them alive. You just got to keep them alive, because when Moscow is surrounded, they're not making a lot of income, and probably at that point Japan has ventured, into some of these territories, so they're making very little money, and if their factories are being bombed, that means they cannot even place, and it's just a matter of time before the Germans or the Italians are able to sort of outnumber and capture Moscow. So that is a crucial, and that's also why we don't want the game to end. But if Moscow falls, and now Germany and Italy's only real objective is just to keep the Allies off the continent of Europe, it's a much easier task if they're just fighting this front over here, not having to spend money and resources to go fight this front. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you. This is I've now made them together. This is the setup chart for the nationalist China and communist China. I kept them on one just for setup purposes. I found it was easier, and they're all one country. So I just found it, the CCP used to be on the Russian setup chart, and the nationalist China used to be on the US chart. Well, I just kept them together now, and with all of the setup charts on the back is going to tell you how it all works. With the nationalist Chinese up here, their objectives, and the communist Chinese specific rules down there. So hopefully that's a little bit simpler. This isn't a final, folks. This is still a draft. But I will show you the Russian, because I'm going to go over the NOs. So +6 for the Russians if they control Helsinki, +2 if Russia and the Allies control 4 territories, all 4 in the Middle East. So Iraq, Iran, Southern Iran, and Tehran. And +5 if Russia is at war with Germany and Italy, and Russia controls any 2 of Leningrad, Stalingrad, or Archangel. So that's a little bit, the Russians are probably going to lose Leningrad, but they're probably going to be able to hold Stalingrad and Archangel a little bit longer. So that gives them a little bit of a bonus. But I think we're going to, because I really want to see this battle here in Poland and Baltic states. So there's going to be an adjustment. There's going to be another NO there. Now, we're also still finalizing the rules for this Barbarossa, which is, the Barbarossa is the German surprise sneak attack on the Russia. Originally, it was 1 territory, and the Germans got to, and it was only the Germans, not the Italians. The Russians would defend at -1, and the Germans would attack at a +1. Well, that's all fine and dandy, folks, if it was a true surprise, but the Russians know this is coming. So what do they typically do? They just back everybody off the front and leave just a token infantry on the front. So it kind of cancels that out. So as of now, in this game, we're going to be play testing 3 territories, not 1. So how this dice for the Germans is going to work, and I only, believe it or not, I only have 1 of these dice. But it's going to operate the same as the Tora, where the 3 territories, you declare your surprise sneak attack for the Barbarossa. You're just going to place these dice down to denote these are the territories that the Germans attack at a +1, and the Russians attack or defend at a -1. Now, we're still playing with this idea. Another idea we had, but I think it's a little bit too powerful, is the Germans got to do sort of a double impulse in 1 territory. So for example, they could capture Western Ukraine, as the first impulse, and the second impulse, they could go into Oleg Kursk, which now they're on the doorstep of Moscow, and that's just too powerful. Now, historically, the Germans actually came in with their Air Force first and caught the Russian Air Force napping and destroyed a lot of the Russian aircraft on the ground before they ever had a chance to defend themselves. And that's very difficult to replicate. So We're still playing with the Barbarossa idea. It's not finalized yet. So if you have an idea, please comment or speak up. Now, in closing with that, now some of you know that I am part of the BBR community as well, and I'm good friends with Sireblood and a lot of the people in that community, and I've learned a lot in terms of game development from Sired. And I want to continue that sort of philosophy in Global War 39. And that is this game, even though I'm the one that's, a major player in terms of the redevelopment, the game does not belong to me. The game belongs to the community and all of you. So it's our game. And in saying that, I'm not going to pretend for 1 second that this game's not going to come out and there's going to be somebody that has a better idea, a better suggestion, or something that's not perfect or could have been done in a better or a different way. So this game, folks, is a dress rehearsal for you to comment, to speak up, to voice whatever it is. And I've tried to explain some of the rationale about stuff that's happening. But that is, so please, in the comment section, please like. And actually, one other thing I forgot to talk about, I meant to, was this territory here in this game. Now, in the original, there's a major factory there. The Russians had some units there, and I like this because not just like the Americans, where they can decide to go Pacific or Atlantic, the Russians are set up to do the same. Now, people are going to have this debate, and I think it's a fun debate about, what's better? What's the better strategy? Well, I think it's fun to engage, but my opinion is each game is different. If Russia's economy is not very good, they might need these units back in Moscow because that means they're not being able to make units. But if they're making a lot of money, or the Allied strategy is a more Pacific strategy, I would say getting these units over here to, hit Japan, especially if they're out of position like they are now, that is a good strategy. So, but like I said, folks, you cannot forget about Moscow, because if it falls, it's I almost think it's game. I almost think it's curtains. That's how strongly I feel about Moscow. Also, when the Germans control Moscow, I believe Spain converts to a pro-Axis, and so does Sweden. So that's a lot of Navy there and a lot of units, and that is a heck of a lot of units and Navy there. When that happens, and now there's only one front, it's tough. So I've added a few more units here. There's now 8 infantry, 2 light armor, 3 T-34s, a AAA, 3 artillery. That is an armored Russian train and an air transport. So the Russian armored train, folks, it can go 4 spaces and carry 2 ground units of any type or 3 infantry. And the air transport can carry 1 infantry. So a lot more mobile, which plays into the theme of a 1 or 2 round faster paced game. Because if Japan's coming down here and they're capturing Calcutta on turn 3, I want these positions here to be over here. Or, they're going to have time. The Russians are going to have time, if they want, to get every single one of these units back to Moscow to defend, which historically that's what saved Moscow, was the Russian winter troops from Siberia on their railway system, making it all the way back to Moscow to save the day. So the Russian player has a decision to make. And sorry I added this in at the end after I talked about how it's not my game, it's your game, but that's all I got, folks. Stay tuned for the Russia 1 turn. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.